The battle's heating up all over the grid. Let's get started.
Another race for the world's greatest driver, Juan Manuel Fangio.
Former world champion Jim Clark leapt into the lead. That's Clark's Lotus going like a bomb.
And James Hunt is the world champion by just one single point.
By being a racing driver, you are under risk all the time. And if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you're no longer a racing driver.
And that is Michael Schumacher ahead, the world champion.
To become a four-time world champion, Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton, champion of the world.
That's for all the kids out there who dream the impossible.
Max Verstappen is champion of the world.
Oh my God! Max Verstappen, you are the world champion! The world champion!
Hello and welcome to episode 28 of F1 in Review 2023. I'm Tom Clabon, and as ever I'm joined by Tristan Fancourt. Today we continue looking back at the Italian Grand Prix, and we start off specifically by returning to that crash, that incident between Lewis Hamilton and Oscar Piastri. It seems that in terms of the technicalities of the regulation, we weren't correct. It's all about action, not consequence. But for you, Tristan, is that correct? Is that how we should be judging incidents like this? Because for me, consequence is what it's all about, really, when it comes to points and where people finish.
Well, that criticism, right, is one that I've seen a lot, and I'm not naive enough to have not seen that before. And I think this was a real sticking point from last week's podcast, Tom, when we were discussing this with Angus. And it seemed like many of you out there disagreed with us because of this argument, which is it's the actions, not the consequences, that dictate the severity of the penalty. And it got me thinking, and I listened to your comments, I saw your comments and your argument, and so I was sort of thinking about how I was going to bridge this, because I still don't necessarily think that's fully correct. And part of the reason for that, Tom, I think, is what we have there is a weird situation where if you always take the action and never the consequences, you end up having false equivalence. And there's a really easy and common F1 scenario that we see all the time, and that's leaving the track and gaining an advantage. If you only take the action as the penalty, you would have no other choice but for any point in leaving the track to give the same penalty, no matter what, right? You could go off the track by accident, all on your own in your own race, come back on, and then you would have to be given the same penalty as someone who left the track, overtook 10 cars and got back on again. Because the consequences don't matter, Tom. Consequences don't matter.
I'm not sure about that myself. I think it's impossible in many ways to disconnect fully an action and a consequence, because if you're going to judge a driver's action in isolation, there's very few occasions where he's going to be given more than a 5-10 second penalty, because there's very few occasions of basically violent conduct when it comes to driver versus driver competition. And I understand that what Hamilton did was not malicious, but ultimately, it was an action that had serious consequences and penalised another's race. I don't see how anyone can disassociate the two, because an action becomes a consequence in many ways, in my view. So I think there needs to be, I suppose, a clearer explanation of that technicality, or indeed a reform of it entirely, in my view, because you could have, let's say, a driver like Verstappen versus Hamilton rewind into Silverstone, for example, a little innocuous, cheeky, ambitious dive down the inside results in a car that's hurtling towards the barriers, for example, at a huge speed and a huge sort of amount of acceleration and damage, really, that comes from that, the force of the impact and the rest. So I don't think the rules are fit and proper in that aspect, and I would challenge anybody who thinks they're fit and proper to go and look at various other incidents where innocuous actions have resulted in rather serious consequences, such as hospitalisation for a few hours, or indeed someone missing a race entirely.
Exactly, and it's not like the FIA don't address this. If you just go into the sporting regulations, there is a get out of jail free card for the FIA stewards, which is that the stewards can impose at their discretion a penalty that they deem worthy for whatever incident has occurred. And so it's not like we're making these assumptions based on nothing. So I would urge you, if you're looking at these incidents and saying, well, it's the action, and then you say, well, familiarize yourself with the sporting regulations. It's in there. And I'm not making this up. Section 54 of the sporting regulations goes through how they penalise them and what they can penalise them for doing. And I think what the point that Tom and I were making last week, and unfortunately Angus isn't here this week to discuss this any further as well, is what occurred last week, which was particularly detrimental, I think, was unlike many light collisions, this one occurred when the action of one person was significant to damage someone who was at no fault. And even if you don't necessarily agree that Hamilton should have got a 10-second penalty because of the regulations as they are, I think we were also trying to highlight a point, which is, are the rules then suitable for that sort of incident? Is it fair that a driver A, in this case Hamilton, can just drive into someone else, driver B, and experience what one may see as an overall advantage to the race? He took out a close rival and ended up far enough away from another driver to mitigate the penalty. Now, if you're fast enough, you're absolutely right that you can do that. And people point that out a lot, and that's fair enough. But are the rules, therefore, strong enough there? Should there be a distinction? And in my mind, okay, even if I go down the line of argument, which is, under the current regulations, the Hamilton got a fair and proper penalty, my argument is, well, therefore, the regulations need to be altered to be clearer on when one penalty starts and another one ends. Because in my mind, two drivers coming together is different from one driver purposely colliding with another. There are different levels, different contexts. So I think if you just want to be black and white and say it's the action that dictates the penalty, then the examples I just gave, with two coming together and then someone purposely killing someone else, those are all the same. The action is the same there, but the consequences are so different. The context is so different. And so I thought, Tom, it was important to address this, really, because my argument may not be convincing, but I think we didn't have enough time to explore it last week. And so I think certainly, as like always, I call on the stewards to be slightly more precise in the way that they explain these rules. And I think they should assess whether or not we need to put something new in place, because I would say that at the moment, there is clearly an advantage to taking out someone from a race, especially if you're challenging for their position.
Yeah, I'd agree as well. I think when it comes to the regulations as stand and the technicalities surrounding it when it comes to certain incidents, it does at times, albeit that unconsciously, unwittingly, incentivise bad behaviour in many ways, because while what Hamilton did was not aiming to get rid of his close rival, somebody who he's racing with, and indeed he apologised afterwards, it very much did that, really. And I think that when you suffer no damage, meanwhile the other car has terminal damage, and you're able to basically burn off a penalty, for want of a better phrase, I do think there has to be a stronger, I suppose, balancing act and check and balance on that, because otherwise you're essentially saying, well, we don't want you to go and crash badly, but if you can crash really smartly and then get rid of your opponent but be fine yourself, that's okay. Is that what Formula One's about? Personally, I wouldn't say it is. So I think, once again, we're seeing another incident where a collision, a close collision, and a penalty being given out has possibly raised more questions than answers, really, about where we stand and how the rules should be. But I think alteration's key, though. I can't see how you can separate an action and a consequence, in my view. But I think doing it too much the other way and going, it's all about the consequence, that would be too far the other way, in my view, because as we know with these Formula One cars and where you crash and how the steering is, for example, if you go onto smooth tarmac or rubble, for example, all that can determine, the context can determine how a crash is, how severe it is. Thankfully, this wasn't very severe, so in my mind, that shouldn't, in terms of the driver's health, that is, I don't think that should weigh too much in terms of putting it the other way. But a more realistic, real terms, pragmatic balance would be better, because at the moment it just seems highly theoretical without actually looking at the granular detail of what is a race on tarmac, basically. And let's carry on then by looking at AlphaTauri, and more specifically Liam Lawson. He took part in his second ever Formula One race and finished just outside the points in P11. Another good weekend for him, kind of for the constructor if we take out Yuki Tsunoda's DNF. What does this tell us though about Liam Lawson and indeed AlphaTauri as well?
Well, clearly it tells us that AlphaTauri has got two interesting drivers at the moment gunning for that second seat. And unfortunately for Ricciardo, isn't it really, that he is being shown up by a rookie, which is dangerous because Formula One loves a rookie. We absolutely adore a rookie. Oh, yeah. And that, I think he was so close to points. I was very sad that he didn't actually get points, but I think it could well be possible. If Liam gets points, I think that would be, really cemented himself really as a future Formula One driver. He's already heavily involved in the Red Bull team anyway, doing all manner of things, including being part of their YouTube stunts. And he is cutting his teeth in Japan Super Formula, which is an absolutely crazy division of racing. I would highly recommend going and checking out some of the racing they do there. They're incredibly fast cars, awesome looking cars, and there's in Asia. And apparently that's where Helmut Marko sends drivers to get better, because he's come into Formula One and absolutely smashed it. And I'm slightly concerned now that when Ricciardo comes back, he's going to have to do a lot of catching up really to get the spotlight away from a driver that no one saw coming into the sport just a few weeks ago. This is not the ideal start for Ricciardo, is it? But, massive fanfare return and immediately breaking your arm and sitting these ones out. So these are dangerous times when there is a potential seat up for grabs. And we know full well that Red Bull and its subsidiaries are ruthless. And I would be looking at Liam now and thinking, he hasn't broken his wrist. He's got to grips with the car pretty quickly. Singapore is going to be a massive challenge. So as we head into Singapore, if I'm Red Bull and I'm looking at Liam, I think Singapore is going to be the final sort of litmus test for this measuring of talent. Singapore is incredibly difficult. It's hot, it's sweaty, it's fast but flowing. It requires absolute constant vigilance at all times because it is an incredibly difficult track to drive. It's like Saudi Arabia meets Monaco if you haven't ever seen it before. It's really thin and tight, but also it's got these fast sections, flowing sections. But like Monaco, if you get off in a certain area, you will have all sorts of problems. And I love it. It's brilliant. But also it's known as the drivers as an endurance challenge. They lose kilograms of sweat, more sweat in this race than any other. And there's an excellent discussion with, I think, one of the drivers. I can't remember which one, but they were talking about their training regime, and I think maybe it was Carlos Sainz, and he was saying that when he was training, the only thing he's training for all year is Singapore. And so Liam, who has not driven in Formula One for very long, is about to be thrown into, I would say, the hardest race mentally and physically of the season. So I think if he comes out of this one as shining as he is at the moment, I think then we've got another F1 driver on our hands, really. It's just waiting for the seat to appear.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because as well, he's he's featured at power circuits of Zandvoort in the Netherlands and then Monza in Italy. So this will be a challenge as well, insofar as it's more of a street circuit. There's more challenges when it comes to braking, navigating tight, windy corners, for example. And I think that after we've seen him here, we'll have a good understanding, if you will, a good, knowledge of how he could be as a Formula One driver moving forwards, because we still were Nick de Vries, bless him. He had one chance at Williams, got points, everyone waxed lyrical like crazy and thought, oh, here we go, he's the next big thing, watch out Perez, here he comes. But naturally, doing it in one race, doing well in one race is one thing, but doing better across three races, arguably three very different circuits to a point as well, is also something that will be in his favour as well. And if I am Helmut Marko, if I am those at AlphaTauri and Co, I would be thinking, well, if he's able to score close to the points in what is a very, very awful car, why rock the boat, in my view? Why necessarily parachute Daniel Ricciardo back in after he's had a, let's be fair, a topsy-turvy, lukewarm, boom and bust start versus a driver who's done remarkably well, really, considering he's been flown in 2 races. I mean, this one will determine it, not to be a make or break situation, but I feel that if he's able to go and replicate his form from Monza and do that in Singapore, I think that will be a great sort of accolade for him, really. But I think as well it shows that there are green shoots for AlphaTauri as well. Good straight line speed in that car in qualifying, and indeed when it came to the race, Tsunoda qualified in 11th, Lawson finished in 11th, so while that's not amazing for them, obviously less than some of their rivals, it's far better than they have done in previous circuits. So looking forwards, there's a few examples coming up of, let's say, Japan and co, where they could actually cash in and maybe do what Alfa Romeo did this weekend and nab themselves a point or two. But yeah, reasons to be positive, I think, really, for AlphaTauri after what's been a fairly mediocre start, if I were to be diplomatic.
I think so. And we brush over very quickly then the qualifying result from Lawson. Look, it's no mean feat to be... Well, think about where he's come from. When he should we say, debuted in the Netherlands, he was stone dead last. And we all expected that, right? Because this is someone who has not driven Formula 1. Yes, okay, he's done other divisions, including Formula 2. But Formula 1's a very different style of driving. It's another step up, and you only have to interview the last cohort of drivers to make that step. People like George Russell said stepping from Formula 2 to Formula 1 was insane, and we expected him to be last, and he was, but then he moved up in the race, and we all sort of started paying attention. But your second race in Monza to qualify just behind your teammate, 12th, absolutely stunning result. He was only 0.3 behind Tsunoda. And Tsunoda's been in that team for ages now and has definitely got to grips with the car and was outperforming Nick de Vries substantially. So I think Red Bull's, they swapped Nick de Vries for Liam Lawson. And I'm concerned for Daniel Ricciardo's future now, because this was not the wild card we were all expecting. This is reverse for poor Ricciardo. And unfortunately, it is really unfortunate that all of this has come for Daniel Ricciardo because of a simple mistake in the Netherlands when he had just unlucky. But unfortunately, one person's unlucky break, so I did there, is another one's lucky break.
Yeah, indeed. And I think as well, if you're looking at someone like Liam Lawson and you're in the I suppose the chair to go and decide who the future drivers are going to be, you look at him and you go, well, he's a young driver, so he's got miles on the tank, if you will, both figuratively and literally as well. And he's coming into this fresh on the crest of a wave, for example. So compare that with Daniel Ricciardo towards the end of his career. You're taking a gamble as well because he's either hot or not really when it comes to some of his form more recently. There's a serious case, I think, if Liam Lawson does well, and by that I mean matches teammates, a serious case to go and say, why not go for Lawson and Tsunoda next year, really? Because, I mean, as we say with AlphaTauri, we're confused about what they are. This is a clear example, in my view, or a clear crossroads where they can go and show everybody what they're all about and be a junior team again, which doesn't sound very good, doesn't sound very sexy when you could be a sister team, for example. But when you're, if we're being honest, fighting down below with Haas and co for the scraps of points, why not go and bring in some young talent you can build a team around, like Williams had done, for example, and then hopefully rise up a bit further than, with respect to Ricciardo, sort of taking a punt on a driver who may have had his best years. Yeah,
exactly. And it's good for the it's good for the New Zealand brand as well, because the last New Zealand racing driver before Liam Lawson was entered in the last two entries was, I don't know if you remember, Brendan Hartley.
I do remember him, not for the right reasons, but I do remember him.
so it's nice for them to have a more positive experience. I mean, before that, if you want to know, it was Mac Thackwell. Before our time, it was 1980, 1984. So it's nice to have another representation on the grid. We like this. So yeah, it's all exciting, I think, for New Zealanders out there. You've got another driver foot in the door. I've never heard the New Zealand national anthem being played at a Formula One race. So this may be your best shot for a while, actually. And I'm very excited because, hey, Liam Lawson's got his eye on Red Bull surely now, Tom.
I would have thought so. Yeah, I mean, you don't stick around in that academy to then go, Williams maybe, you know?
Oh, poor Albon.
And talking about Williams, really, a very good weekend for them again, courtesy of Mr. Albon. He finished in P7 after scoring a P8 finish in Netherlands before that. There's now a 10-point gap between Williams, the constructor, and Haas in P8. Another good weekend. Are they consolidating that P7? Is that too early to say, maybe?
God. Now I predicted at the beginning of the season that Williams could well get 7th place. And I won't lie, Tom. That wasn't a bit of magic. That wasn't me reading my crystal ball. Otherwise, I would have gone out and got some lottery tickets. It was, in fact, just an educated guess because I have full faith in Williams getting back to the front, especially as they've got James Vowles pushing them forward, who is doing an outstanding job in terms of PR and fan engagement. I will say that other teams need to look at the way that James, as a team principal, talks about the brand. It's not your usual, oh, so how's Williams doing? Well, we're doing great. Obviously, we're doing fine. We're Williams. We're good. Thank you for asking that question. It's real in-depth, interesting knowledge. He admits the faults at Ferrari and seems to be enacting upon them in a way that's incredibly constructive. And that's what I like to see. Williams has been so destructive for a while. It's really nice that they seem to be getting into a rhythm. So, to answer your question though, Tom, because I've been skirting around it, I don't think they've solidified it just yet. They obviously have pushed themselves ahead now, significantly ahead of Haas, being 10 points, as right, being the delta between Williams and Haas. However, we have just, I think, exited out of perhaps Williams' top scoring tracks. And I was a little bit disappointed at Monza because really this should have been Williams' chance to pull out something incredible so that they can get that difference between themselves and Haas way beyond 10 points. Because as we head towards Singapore, Japan, for example, Haas may well have the performance to sort of bring it back a bit. So they really needed 2 lots of points, and unfortunately 13th place for Logan Sargent is just not good enough when Albon was in 7th. And I was so gutted as well that Albon didn't get 6th. I know that links a little bit to Hamilton's penalty. I'm not gutted because Hamilton, by the way, got 6th place even with a penalty. I'm gutted because I felt that Williams on merit deserved to be deserved to be up there. All right, yeah. So, however, that basically means Williams has been scoring points with only one driver. That's no secret. And so I think that Haas is the advantage in terms of their overall driver lineup. And so, no, I don't think they have solidified it.
Interesting. I think they've given themselves a fighting chance and then some, really, because when we look at the bottom 3-4 constructors teams and look at how many times they've scored points since the beginning of this calendar, it's few and far between. I mean, we're going to get onto Alfa Romeo, for example, but before they scored one singular point here in Italy, the last time before that was Canada, which was over 5 races before that, really. So points don't come too often, really, for these teams. I take your point entirely when it comes to Williams' purple patch being over. I think they may have 1 or 2 more days in the sun, if you will, but looking at somewhere like Qatar, looking at somewhere like Mexico, indeed Singapore, I think they could struggle there as well. The question is, will Haas rise up and not only beat that deficit of 10 points plus, but beat it, not convincingly, but get it over the line, really? I'm not too sure they will, because it's been an ambivalent period for Haas, I think it's fair to say. They've been consistent, they've been together, but not really anywhere near the point. And that's before and indeed during this period of many power circuits. So for that reason, I think that Williams would be immensely disappointed if they were to go and lose this P7 place. But the fact they're indeed in there fighting for it, I think is remarkable in of itself. I remember when you put forward the proposition of them being P7 in the Constructors, I think we all sort of winced a bit, raised eyebrows, say what you will type thing. We didn't think it was going to be possible, but I think now they're giving themselves a good chance. And 10 points, I mean, the gap between AlphaTauri and Alfa Romeo is 7 points. To me, that seems massive. Why can't 10 be just as massive in my view when it comes to P7 and P8? But I won't do the classic and go, oh yeah, only 50 odd points between Williams and Alfa and Alpine. Will they do it? No, that's impossible. But yeah, P7 would be remarkable if it's done.
It's interesting you say Williams' purple patch. Would you say they've had a purple patch this year? Or is it just consistency?
I'd say, okay, Albon's had a purple patch. I think Williams, as a constructor by extension, have had a purple patch. And that's been at power circuits where it's been a lot of straight line speed and little need for serious downforce, if you will. If you were to go and look back at other examples, like say Monaco, for example, P14, P18, that sort of just shows how poorly they can do at circuits where their setup isn't right and their strengths aren't right as well. I mean, looking at Hungary as well, 18th and 14th. So I do think to myself, this is probably the best that Williams are going to do. Sorry, 18th and 11th and 18th rather. I do think this is probably the best that Williams are going to do, and I think it's a purple patch because the idea of them getting back-to-back points, even when George Russell was there, was something that was seen as far-fetched. So I think they've had a purple patch, relatively speaking, but I think they'll be hoping for more to come when it comes to next season if they can hold on to everybody involved, really, because it's not only the drivers, but James Vowles and co coming into the team have done a great job as well, of course.
I would say I agree. I think Albon has done exceptionally well and has pushed that forward. I think, to be honest, I think Williams has been sort of green all year and has given us all hope there. But it's a real shame that they just haven't quite got there with their second driver yet, and they seem to have fallen into this trap that many other teams also have, which is you have one good driver and a driver that apparently can't pick up the points when necessary, which is such a shame because if you throw your mind back, Tom, all the way back 28 episodes of F1 Review ago to the very beginning of this season, you remember Logan Sargent stormed out the gate, and whilst not necessarily doing as well as Albon is doing now, really gave us all hope. So it's interesting that he hasn't quite been able to keep up that momentum, would you say, and hasn't really been able to extract everything we thought he would from the car.
I still think the jury's out on Sargent in my view, because I'm not sure if I'm judging him by himself on merit or whether I'm comparing him to Latifi, because if you compare him to Latifi, he's finishing races more often, he's getting closer to the points, which in of itself is a positive and improvement from what came before him. But if we're going to go and ignore, I suppose, the Latifi record and period and just see it by itself, see the car they've got, the potential it's got, and how well it can do at the hands of Alex Albon, I think then you have to go, Sargent probably hasn't done as well as many would hope. He probably has, unfortunately, fallen flat in some occasions, but I don't think that I can fully judge him yet. But put it this way, I've seen the first half of the film, and I think the conclusion is going to be what I thought it was going to be, and that being disappointment, unfortunately, for him. Do you concur, or do you think I'm being a bit harsh?
Well, I don't, because he seems at the fastest track to be sort of stuck slightly behind the points. You are right, of course, that Williams will benefit from some of the desert tracks as we head towards them. They are very fast paced. But even with that bonus of the Williams top speed, I mean, Logan Sargent's finished in 12th place at the beginning of the year, and then in Italy, right, another incredibly fast track we would expect, well, wasn't in the points again in 13th. So he's not really gone anywhere, right? I would say that throughout the whole of the season, he's sort of still here. He's still at that same point through ups and a few downs, and as the season's gone on, he hasn't necessarily been able to give us a magic moment yet. So I'm waiting for that a little bit. So I don't know. I don't know with Logan. I think he's still rookie, still new, fresh to the sport. So perhaps he will get a bit more seasoned. And I'd like to think that Williams will, if they do keep him, it's all for the right reasons. And that they know something I don't. Because I do believe that they may know something that I don't. So hopefully this is just, breaking him in over the first sort of race, first season of races. And then as we head to next year, if they do keep him around, then that'll be the opportunity for him to demonstrate why he's retained that seat when there are other drivers, unfortunately, Tom, who want it instead.
And it may be a bit presumptuous or indeed fast to go and say this, but I think when you go and compare Sargent's performances to Liam Lawson's so far, I think you can already see a gulf in quality there, at least when it comes to getting out the trap, if you will, when it comes to Formula One. Now, that doesn't mean that's set in stone, i.e. Lawson will always be better than Sargent, and Sargent will always be second fiddle, and he's got no chance of having a successful Formula One career. But I do think that when you're already seeing Liam Lawson matching his best performances in a far worse car, it does perhaps show you that Sargent isn't the man for the job currently. But many different drivers have taken years to bed in, so there's still hope and optimism and reasons for him to prove us all wrong. But let's just say the writing is starting to be written on the wall in many ways. I don't think he's going to be at Williams for all too many years if it carries on like this. As mentioned previously then, for the first time since Canada, Alfa Romeo have scored themselves a point, this being thanks to Valtteri Bottas. I think it's fair to say, though, that he may have stumbled into this one, really, after the aforementioned Hamilton-Piastri crash. Do you agree?
I don't know, Tom. It's hard to say. It's very hard to put categorically say whether or not someone stumbled into points, because to be in the points, you still have to finish. You still have to be ahead of everyone else. And to get that, to that 10th place, it's not an easy thing to get. I would say that what was interesting about Bottas in Italy was that he led a very clean race, and thanks to everyone else's fights and unfortunate collisions, he was able to catch up. And that often happens in Formula One, because you get into these scenarios where you get these long DRS trains, and then those 3 or 4 cars start putting each other away as they're all getting that DRS, and then basically the lonely lingering person in nowhere, no man's land, is just sort of just driving around. And of course that person can be in first place, as often it's Max Verstappen, no one around him, just driving around. Or I think last race kind of Valtteri Bottas, he was significantly ahead of Liam Lawson, and with Oscar Piastri having to get a pit stop and things like that, it was just a matter of him being close enough to still come out ahead and get up to 10th place. Now, Alfa Romeo hasn't been the fastest team this year, and I think certainly they've been trekking downwards, would you say, in terms of the performance spiral?
I would say so, yeah.
So I know it's very difficult to just say something as blasé as, he stumbled into points, because to get into the points, even to take advantage of another situation, you have to be good enough. And I think what we can see about Bottas is he is certainly performing well within the Alfa Romeo brand, but let's face it, he only qualified in 14th place, and thanks to a whole load of other problems, that sort of just trekked upwards for him as everyone else sort of fell out. But hey, that's the way it works, and I don't think we're going to see a huge amount of Valtteri Bottas this year. So it was just nice that he was able to get some points. And hey, look, put it this way, he was able to get points in Alfa Romeo. Logan Sargent should have been there to take points in his Williams. He wasn't there to stumble into points. So that's what I mean. It's actually not as simple as just saying, he just got given the points, because there are there's drivers out there who had, I would say, better machinery this weekend that couldn't get it. So there has to be some significant talent there anyway. And I still stand by what I said last week, which is Bottas, I still rate as one of the best drivers on the grid, even though he hasn't won any world championships.
Yeah, I think your description of how we came into points is probably a bit more accurate and fairer, really. I don't think if we'd have finished in 11th or 12th, any of us would have been screaming at our TV or radio sets, how on earth has he not done it? That poor man, where is your luck? But yes, no, I mean, you've got to be there to go and collect those points, and you're totally right when it comes to Sargent, his teammate. You got Pierre Gasly as well, who could have easily got points in that machinery in my view. Lance Stroll, once again, you've got his teammate Fernando Alonso in P9. He's down in P16, so he's done well there, and he's able to go and grind out a good point really for Alfa Romeo after what has been quite a sort of a dormant period, I think, when it comes to them. But I don't think we'll see too much more of any of them, be that sort of Guan Yu Zhou, be that Valtteri Bottas, the team in of itself. They seem to have sort of risen up with this huge amount of fanfare when it came to Andrea Seidel coming over and the ambitions when it came to Audi and co. And I imagine they're still there. I imagine this is a bedding in period really for Seidel and the fact that he moved over so late. But it does seem to me like they've just accepted that the season is going to be a write-off, which seems bizarre really when you consider how well Valtteri Bottas did the first few seasons he was at Alfa Romeo, for example, and the ability that car showed. Largely in thanks, you have to go and say, to that Ferrari engine last year, but still, you've got to go and convert that, and that he did. But I think the fact we're celebrating a point for Alfa Romeo really does show how their performance has regressed in my view, and looking forward I don't really see too many more opportunities of where they're able to cash in, because if I'm being honest, I don't really know what Alfa Romeo's strengths are, similar to Haas in many different ways. It's certainly not power circuits or speed circuits, on merit at least, because when it comes to qualifying you rarely see those cars up and around the points. But maybe somewhere like Singapore could be one if he's able to go and beat the test of endurance. That could be one for Valtteri Bottas to cash in on, maybe.
I hope so. I hope Valtteri continues to sort of just enjoy himself in Formula One, and he seems like he is having quite a lot of fun. And there was the recent Grill the Grid episode, which they were doing young drivers, the drivers like children's photo, and Valtteri Bottas's child photo just looks like a tiny little him without his little moustache and stuff. And he's got a bowl cut, and I did laugh quite a lot. I would highly recommend, if you haven't seen that, it's on YouTube, the Grill the Grid with the young photos. It is funny, and I think that's where Valtteri is now. He's with a team that's transitioning away from that Alfa Romeo brand, as Alfa Romeo has it been confirmed is going to Haas as their engine supplier, which is a weird. I think it's their engine supplier they're going to be, because Haas has got MoneyGram as their title sponsor. In Formula One, if you are not aware, and I don't blame you because it's a bit bizarre, you don't necessarily have to have an engine supplier called named after the people that have to give you the engine, so you don't have to have it as a Mercedes engine. So, for example, even though Haas using Ferrari engines, then they can say it's an Alfa Romeo engine, and so that's how they could be sponsored by Alfa Romeo, even though that they've got MoneyGram as their title sponsor. God, sponsoring is so weird in Formula One. But the underlying team, the engineering team behind that, is called Sauber, and Sauber is transitioning away from Alfa Romeo and towards Audi, and so I see where Bottas is at the moment in a team that's transitioning away from its old sponsorship towards some very new, very shiny money, and I'm very excited for Audi to be part of the sport. But I don't think he's going to be there when it comes along. So I think he's just helping the team develop for the future and trying to run his own races. He doesn't need to worry about the constructors or the drivers' championships. There was a lot of pressure on him when he was at Mercedes, and I think he dealt with that very well. And now, as he's in his twilight years, he will just be hoovering up points where necessary, and basically just in doing a bit of a Kimi Räikkönen, I think, where Kimi Räikkönen said that he drove for a hobby. I see Bottas falling into that now. So as we head to Singapore is a great track because, well, from the perspective of sort of your one-hit qualifying wonders, because if you get ahead at Singapore, it's very easy to stay there as long as you don't make a mistake. So, Tom, as we go to Singapore, I think it could be a good opportunity for Bottas to, say, qualify in 10th or 9th and just hold on to it. In fact, I think that's Haas's best, a really good opportunity for Haas to get some serious points as well, because if they can just get a ninth place, a magic ninth place, then they can just hold on to it and start whittling away at Williams, which is why I'm so concerned about that particular deficit as well. So, yeah, it's odd, isn't it? I would say that Alfa Romeo has really been under the radar this year, not because they're doing badly, but just because they're not doing good either. They're just sort of there making up the numbers sometimes.
Very much so. And Bottas has got a contract with Alfa Romeo, soon to be Audi, until 2025. He's 34 years old at the moment. Do you think that'll be it for him? Will he stay on further? Because I kind of feel that when that contract ends, that'll be curtains for him.
Well, Audi's coming in 2026. So we will have a period where Alfa Romeo returns to being called Sauber, which is how I remember them. I remember them being Sauber. And in fact, I remember, I don't know whether or not, Tom, it's just because I'm I don't know, old, or I didn't understand Formula One back in the day, but I don't remember the sponsorship being this complicated. Like McLaren were McLaren, Mercedes were Mercedes, Caterham were Caterham. Oh, that's not true. Lotus and Renault. Do you remember at one point there was two Lotuses? Two sets of Lotus on the track.
Lotus Caterham.
So there was Lotus Renault, and Lotus Caterham, and you were like, oh, it's Lotus. Which one is? Okay, so maybe that's not true at all. But it's certainly more complicated now, maybe, because I'm paying closer attention to it all. But yeah, I don't know. I think at the end of it, that's it. Maybe Bottas and Hamilton are going to retire at the same time. What do you think? They seem to be good friends.
Yeah, no, that would make sense. I think when it comes to Hamilton, for example, he's somebody who is probably going to go into, I suppose, his final years with Mercedes. I can't see a contract beyond what he's got at the moment, or indeed in moving teams. And I think that I get the impression with Bottas, he's had his time in the sun, similar to Raikkonen, and now he's happy just to be in Formula One, as you say. So that would make perfect sense. And it'd be nice to see him anyways, because as we know, they get on so well. And on that note, that seems that's all we've got time for in terms of episode 28 of F1 in Review. Thank you very much for listening all the way to the end of this one, be that on your preferred podcast provider or indeed elsewhere. A reminder, as ever, you can follow us on Twitter or X and TikTok, the handle being F1 in Review. And as mentioned, we'll be back to go and cover the fallout, the good, the bad and the ugly from the Singapore Grand Prix. If you're watching, listening or observing it in the UK, it's a 2 p.m. start for Saturday. And then when it comes to the race, that's on Sunday. Once again, if you're in the UK, that is 1 p.m. There's some talk of rain, but nothing serious at the moment. But we'll wait and see if that transpires or indeed leads to anything at all. But come win, rain or shine, we'll be back to go and discuss all that came from this Grand Prix in the next episode of F1 in Review. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next week.